Okay, can we start? Everyone, phones off and all the rest. Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a quorum, so we'll now commence. Apologies have been received from Brendan, Deputy Brendan Smith. He's on Oireachtas business. Today we're convening a series of meetings with North-South implementation bodies established under the Good Friday Agreement, as agreed as part of our work programme for 2018. It's been some time before this committee has heard from some of these bodies, and I know we're all keen to get an update on their work and the challenges facing them, and in particular the impact Brexit may have on their work. Today we'll be hearing from InterTradeIreland and Tourism Ireland across two sessions. In our first session today, I'm pleased to invite representatives from InterTradeIreland in to speak with us. So, can I just suspend while the delegates come in? Is that agreed? Thank you. I'd like to formally welcome Aidan Gio, Chief Executive of our meeting today, and Kerry Curran. In a moment I'll invite you to give your opening statement, and this will be followed by some questions from the committee, and we'll be taking the questions and answers from the floor. On behalf of the Joint Committee, before we begin, can I remind members, guests and those in the public gallery to please ensure that their mobile phones, tablets, etc. are switched off completely for the duration of the meeting, as they cause interference, even on silent mode, with the recording committee in the committee rooms. So, on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank. No, sorry, we're going again.
No, you go ahead now.
Okay, so please go ahead.
Just for the record, I think my official title is Designated Officer of InterTradeIreland.
Apologies for that.
We're unable to appoint the CEO at the minute. So, but yes, I just thought it would be worthwhile to run through, just to have a look at really the achievements of InterTradeIreland and how we've changed, how the landscape has changed over this last 20 years, and then touch on the impact of Brexit. But as the committee will be well aware, we were founded formally in the British-Irish Agreement Act and the Good Friday Agreement, and the environment in which we were formed in, I thought, was very well summed up in an editorial where talked about a cold-denying silence that has descended across the island and resulted in a process of fracture across all spheres of public life. This was particularly acute in the business sector. And research commissioned by us a number of years ago showed that the actual level of cross-border trade was very significantly below that what you would expect between two economies of this size sharing an island space. In fact, the trade was much less than 30% of what you would expect. So, I mean, what has changed? Has things changed in the interim? From our point of view, InterTradeIreland has, we've engaged, we've advised, we've guided over 39,000 companies in this last 18, 19 years. There are companies in every county across the island. We see ourselves very much as an all-island body and working with businesses across all parts of the island and offering the opportunities that cross-border trade and business development can give to small businesses across the island. We've worked directly, supported through our programmes, 8,000 companies. Over 1,000 of them have now exported first-time exporters, and nearly 1,000 were first-time innovators. And export and innovation is critical to growth of businesses and growth of the economy. As a result of those interventions, and they are primarily with small businesses, and when we say small, we're talking at the small to micro scale rather than the 40 to 50 plus size. Through those interventions, those businesses have created for themselves over 1.2 billion of additional business development value, and they've delivered over 14,000 jobs. So the impact has been considerable of the body in the last 18 years. At a more macroeconomic level, you see total cross-border trade has doubled. It's been growing at an average rate of 4% per annum and currently stands about 6.3 billion. The cross-border market is disproportionately important for both Northern Ireland and Ireland. At present, Northern Ireland makes up about 10 to 12% of total exports from Ireland, but it's the population size. This is exports from Ireland to the UK, but the population, Northern Ireland's population size or proportion of the UK total is only 2.9%. So there's a disproportionate reliance on Northern Ireland export trade for Irish business. For over half of Irish exporters, Northern Ireland is the destination for more than half of their exports. And for 25% of Irish firms, for a quarter of Irish exporters, Northern Ireland is their only export market. So the degree of inter-reliance is considerable. It's an especially important market for small businesses. For Northern Ireland, we know that the majority of cross-border transactions are made by micro and small businesses. 74% of export deliveries involve businesses with fewer than 50 employees. 80% of micro businesses and 70% of small businesses who export from Northern Ireland sell only to the south. That's their only export market. So the type of business involved in cross-border trade is also reflected in the pattern of trade across the border. It's relatively high frequency, and it's of relatively low value, which again reflects the small business, but it also reflects a growing, as we would say, island economy. These are businesses, primarily small businesses, that are operating really and treating the island as a local market. We know there's about 208,000 vans going up and down every month across the border. They're doing it with relatively low value produce on board, but it's indicative of a market that is a local island economy. It's really a business ringing up and saying, yes, can you have that? Yes, I'll have it with you. I'll get it down the road and this afternoon. So it's a market that is characterised by low value but high frequency, small businesses, and operating as a local market because there are no barriers there. So there's strong evidence too, and this has come as a result of research we've been doing over this last year, of a considerable growth and a considerable level of interconnectedness of trade through the development of cross-border supply chains. Our research, which we commissioned from the SRI, shows that the majority of cross-border trade takes place in intermediate products. That's products that are moving within supply chains, often back and forth across the border, numerous times before a final product is sold. That's really, there's how trade and the trade picture has developed, and how now we see a much more interconnected cross-border picture. It's also the same with research partnerships, which are also vital for the economies. We in InterTradeIreland convene and chair an all-island steering group for Horizon 2020. In 2014, the group agreed a strategic action plan to be implemented by ourselves, with a target to draw down 175 million in North-South collaborative projects from Horizon 2020. That's a considerable uplift on the achievement on the previous FP7, Framework Programme 7, which I think we drew down about around 75 million. But so far, the evidence suggests that and these are results from the first 2 years of Horizon 2020, North-South applications and drawdown has doubled that of the equivalent period in the previous FP7 programme. So the total drawdown to March 2018, which we have where statistics are available up to, shows that collaborative North-South applications from Horizon 2020 is around 68.5 million, which is nearly what we achieved in the whole of the programme and the whole of the FP7 programme. So again, it's showing you just how the connectivity and the relationships have built up, and we're starting to reap value from those initiatives. We also promote or provide the Secretariat to the US-Ireland R&D partnership, and it is a partnership that is growing and delivering world-class research. Projects that are sponsored through that or supported through that programme are world class, and there's roughly about 70 million worth of world class research that is being done on that collaborative basis through the US-Ireland R&D partnership. The cross-border market, so cross-border research or cross-border cooperation is delivering. We see it just in measuring our own performance in terms of those value added and business development figures and the jobs created, but we also see it in a wider perspective. It plays a valuable role, particularly in the development of export strategy. 71% of exporters report that cross-border trading was the catalyst for exporting further afield. For 71% of businesses, their first experience of exporting was into the market, the cross-border market in this island. There they gained the confidence and the experience to go further afield. Recent research that we published by ourselves finds that cross-border exporters have higher productivity, they've higher turnover, and they employ more people than businesses that don't export. In fact, goods firms which export across the border are found to have a productivity boost of 9%. And 93% higher turnover than firms that only sell in the local market, and they employ 46% more people. So cross-border trading is delivering. And I think that the evidence shows that the degree of connectedness between Northern Ireland and Ireland has grown substantially in the past 20 years, and that cold denying silence that I spoke about at the beginning has been replaced now by a real willingness to do business, and business that is creating real value. We envisage building on these growing relationships by scaling existing partnerships and networks into wider clusters. Brexit. We've obviously, as a cross-border trade and business development body, a trade body, Brexit is exercising our minds very considerably over this last nearly 2 years now. We've undertaken first a programme of research. InterTradeIreland bases everything and all our interventions on evidence-based research. We undertake a programme of research to determine the potential impact of Brexit on the existing trade structures and to help us identify sectors and business types which are most likely to be impacted. One of the first studies we published was looked at the impact of what is known as the hard Brexit, the WTO scenario, and that concluded that it would have an impact, if nothing else changed, a negative impact of 16% on cross-border trade, and it would have an impact across all sectors, but it would be predominantly the agri-food sector. This is now well known, but I mean, we published that report 2 years ago now, so it was one of the first reports that provided that evidence. Our further reports, as I mentioned earlier, shows that supply chains are highly integrated, and the majority of goods, as I said, cross the border do so as components within supply chains now. And that is to a much higher degree than trade with other international trade. So protecting those cross-border supply chains will be important. Cross-border trade, as we know, and I said earlier, supports increased productivity, employment and firm turnover. And also small businesses that trade across the border are at the greatest risk. They fall into the highest risk categories. They're most exposed to a hard Brexit, basically because they don't have the capabilities and the resources to deal with extra bureaucracy, and we've found that they're operating at relatively low margins. So that's in terms of the research. The research is obviously much more detailed. That's the headline points from it, and Kerry will have the details of that. We've also opened very quickly a Brexit advisory service to help businesses navigate through whatever new relationship emerges from the negotiations. That Brexit advisory service, well, the first thing we did was to get out and to speak to businesses. And really our message there was to tune down the noise, because we were very concerned and remained concerned. At that stage there was only something like 98% of businesses were basically ignoring Brexit and not planning. We were trying to get them to start planning for it, because and we were helping them with that process, because the main reason for them not planning, as they told us, was uncertainty. But there were issues, there were scenario planning, there were risk impact assessments that they could undertake to see where they were exposed, so that they are ready for whatever scenario emerges. So since then we have had events all over the island. We continue to have events. We've also introduced a Brexit voucher, which is assisting small businesses to start the planning process. They can claim up to €2,000 to get expert advice to see where they're most exposed and to start taking action. That service is. There's a very, very high demand for that service, and it's rising all the time. I think we've given out, 675 vouchers, about roughly 50-50 north-south over this. But that has been a rise. That it was slow at the start, and now it's really starting to take off. And we have a very busy team there trying to meet demand.
It'll take off even more after today.
It could well do, yeah. So I think that's it. That'll do for the openings.
Okay. Kerry, do you want to come in?
No, I've no further comments.
No questions? Declan.
Firstly, thanks for your presentation, Aidan. Just a couple of questions relating to, obviously, the research and to what degree you can answer the following, say, questions. I mean, in an exit, regardless, hard, soft or otherwise, there's a high degree, particularly south-north, of companies, for example, if you take road maintenance as a classic example, that trade in the south. The tendering process around, obviously, EU tendering and whatever, what are the implications going to be for, say, northern companies being able to actually partake in an EU tendering process if they're outside the EU? You mentioned just once the issue of south-north movement of obviously giving out vouchers and whatever. I mean, what sort of numbers of people relative to people taking businesses from the trading from the north into the south? What degree is the south trading into the north? Because we rarely hear of many companies who are benefiting, if you like, in exporting into the north, and I'm interested to know if you have any ideas on the figures. And you refer then to, say, the programme Horizon 2020 and the large amount of money that was involved. Again, very much EU-led programmes. How are these going to be sustained, or is there any commitment in a post-Brexit situation to guarantee them? We've had various people in here from, the Peace and Reconciliation funds and one of the other who are saying that there's guarantees up to 2022. What guarantees have you in relation to your own organisation, if any?
Yeah, in terms of tendering, We do. I mean, one of our programmes is assists businesses enter the cross-border public procurement market. And there are a number of issues that could make that more difficult in terms of Brexit. Kerry will maybe go into them in a minute. In terms of the numbers, as said, we know 25% of Irish exporters sell only to the north. So that's a considerable amount of businesses. 50% of them sell 50% of their produce to the north. So it's a considerable amount of businesses that are involved in cross-border trade from an Irish perspective. We struggle to get the exact numbers from the statistics. We know in Northern Ireland there's, I think it's approximately about 7,800, is it? Small businesses trade annually into the south. So it's a considerable amount of businesses that are involved in cross-border trade, and that is very important. It's the number of businesses, not just the value. The number of businesses involved in cross-border trade is substantial and disproportionate, because it is, for many small businesses now, it is regarded as a local market almost.
Sorry, just you have a figure for north-south, the individual said 7,800. Why is there not a figure in terms of who's trading south, or is there? Sorry.
No, if I can answer that. The reason why we don't have the exact figure for south to north is the way that the data is collected on firms by the Central Statistics Office. So what we have in terms of hard data is around the interstat returns of cross-border traders. Obviously, those are firms who are trading above that threshold of 635,000 euros. So we have those in terms of solid numbers, but the rest of the data that we have is through survey data. So, for example, our All-Ireland Business Monitor, which has been going for 10 years now, on average we see about 20% of the firms in the south saying that they're trading north, and that's on average over the past 10 years worth of data. But in terms of actual solid statistical numbers from the Central Statistics Office, that doesn't exist.
Just as a final observation, I'm sorry to come in a third time, but I travel the motorway every day, and the degree of the small business who are trading into the city here, particularly whether it's carpentry, electrical services, certainly if you're coming the other way, heading south north, I would say it's a very, very small fraction of small businesses who are able to trade into the north or are getting the opportunity, and it's something that always strikes me that there's an imbalance, a large imbalance between the availability of people being able to trade south-north, but yet an awful lot of impediment for small business to trade
in terms of our programmes
into the north.
Roughly 2/3 of the businesses that participate in our programmes come from the south.
Just the EU, there was just a question that Declan had asked, and I don't know, did you get a chance to answer, was on EU procurement rules, like businesses, like how is Brexit going to affect ability for northern companies to actually do those or tender for those jobs?
So the latest technical notice and advice on this from the UK government, which was published recently, actually advises businesses in the north that they will be able to apply for public tendering in the south. And likewise, there will be a new e-tender system for the UK, which again will, all things being equal, businesses from the south, or indeed the rest of Europe, should be able to apply to those through that e-tender system.
Maureen.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Your presentation is just one of a number that really shows what Brexit can possibly, the damage that Brexit can do, and I think also the way in which the kind of issues that you brought up today certainly were not being considered when people were voting on Brexit. The research that you did, and I know it is directing your work, but has it gone anywhere else, in terms of governments, particularly in the UK, that they would be influenced by it in any sort of way? So that's the first question. We know it must have been difficult for companies, I can understand where they're coming from, but to plan for something that they don't know exactly what it's going to be. Hard Brexit, soft Brexit, another referendum, whatever. Have you, and it's interesting the number of people who've taken up the offer for help at this point. Are you envisaging more? And have you the capacity to help more on that planning? Third one is, we know about the agri-food business, so are you seeing to date harm that has been done already in that particular area. My last one is about, you mentioned there about the high-level visitors from the EU partners and what sort of response you got when you had those meetings. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't get the last question.
When you, in the briefing that we got here, you hosted a number of high-level visitors from the EU partners as part of the government's efforts to increase understanding of the complexities of the border issue. And I was just wondering what sort of response you got from those meetings.
Okay, in terms of our research is almost always conducted. We form a committee to oversee the research. On our committees, we have our departments, our sponsor departments. So the research feeds immediately into the policy frameworks, and it's also within, I presume, in Northern Ireland, the departments there have links with what's going on in London. So we think that it has been influential. We think that it has raised the issues. You know, the work we did on non-tariff barriers and the impact of WTO was the first really hard evidence of the impact, potential impact of a hard Brexit scenario. So, and it did feed into policy makers. In terms of companies and demand, yes, we envisage a rise in demand. You know, we don't know what the new relationship will be, but it is likely to be at least some changes to the trading relationship. We don't know what, so we do. It may be just reassurance that we have to give, hopefully, but we are planning for a rise in demand, and we have increased our budget to our Brexit advisory service accordingly for next year. In terms of the impact on the agri-food industry, it's I would say probably the biggest impact to date on it is being felt in Northern Ireland in terms of access to skills and access to labour, and the reduction and the willingness of European migrant labour to take up positions in the Northern Ireland industry. That is by far the biggest impact. I'm not sure what you mean about the high level.
Well, it's just what we were told, that you did host some high level visitors from the EU partners.
Yes, we were invited to host meetings. Yes, we didn't actually arrange the meetings. We had Michel Barnier was in InterTrade meeting the business community. The meeting, he heard the views of cross-border traders, and direct from the horse's mouth, if you like, and the difficulties that they would envisage and that they would experience from any sort of barriers to trade, particularly in the areas of form filling and customs, and the costs that would bring.
No.
Thanks very much. Apologies to step out for some of the presentation, but I just wanted to ask briefly if, in terms of the obviously you've outlined quite a significant number of issues there facing businesses in cross-border trade. I'm just wondering, given the expertise not just of the organisations you work with, but you yourselves corporately, what level of engagement there has been with the Irish government in terms of preparedness work, but also alternatively, has the British government at any stage sought out your expertise, engagement, information in terms of crafting and shaping their own either negotiation approach or more, their more general approach in relation to Brexit?
Yeah, I mean, we're funded by the departments for the economy in Northern Ireland, the Department of Business in the South. We have been given additional funding to support our Brexit interventions. by both Northern Ireland and the Southern Government. We work very closely in terms of there's a campaign ongoing at the minute that's sponsored by the Irish Government, so we're speaking at all those events. I think there's one today or tomorrow. There's one in Cork and there's one, is it in Galway today? But we speak at all those events, so we're integrally
Getting Ireland Brexit ready events,
yes,
is it?
Yes, yeah.
I've expressed disappointment with the department that there's none of them happening in the north. And I'm sure you would share that disappointment given the nature of your own work, but I wouldn't ask you to comment on that. Yes. But specifically there in relation to the British government, I appreciate where the funding comes from, but I just wonder whether at official level or ministerial, political level, has there been any engagement with yourselves in terms of, I'm not looking at any state secrets or anything, like I don't want to, but just in terms of other craft, if there is any craft involved,
we have had
approach.
Interest in the services that we're delivering.
Okay.
We've had visits from UK government departments who are interested in the services that we have been delivering, because we did introduce these services very early. And in fact, we've had them evaluated already, and we're able to say about the success of for instance, the voucher. That 85% of businesses who've received it were delighted with the advice they got. So we have had engagement at that level in terms of the interest in the services that we're delivering. Yeah.
See, just finally, Chair. See, in terms of the Brexit voucher you mentioned.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a wee bit, because I don't know if there's a kind of like a uniform approach to that, or if it's different for each business. What primarily is that being utilised for by businesses? I'm just interested in terms of what that actually means in terms of assisting them to get Brexit ready. If you're a shopkeeper, or if you're, I don't know, a factory owner or whatever, how does that look in terms of getting ready for Brexit?
I mean, we make it easy for businesses to access it, because the businesses that are impacted, are most exposed to Brexit, are small businesses. And these are businesses that don't have the time nor the capability. So it's an easily accessible service. It's £2,000 to deal with an issue that they identify. A potential impact of Brexit, and whether that's informational or operational, or it could be with technical, like how do I deal with, what does VAT mean, what are going to be the implications of changing in VAT, what if there were customs, what would I have to do, so it's really, it's basic stuff.
It's kind of in a way, it's primarily on that.
And it's risk assessment in many ways as well. Where am I exposed? And then it should outline what should I do as well.
And do you then deliver that training?
We've created a framework of experts and that we can draw down on at the business. So if it is a specific tax issue, they can get a tax expert to do that.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Seán.
And Gurmagov to both of you for the presentation so far. You talked about how a lot of the business, cross-border business, that is done by small businesses is high frequency and low value, and we know there are millions of journeys across the border, millions just on the border crossings that they count, never mind the hundreds that they don't count. So do you have a sense of the vulnerability of businesses that are operating on low margins that may have an impact either on time or on if there are any kind of checks or customs or stops at the border, what that time is going to mean? I think for a HGV, the average it out at £1 a minute. So if there's an additional 5 minutes and X amount of times a year, what that is going to cost, do you think? There will be businesses who will fold as a result of Brexit. Also, I've first-hand experience of the challenges that faced the agri-food sector when all of Ireland was in the European Union and we were operating across the border that we've had for the past decade. So I know how difficult Brexit is likely to be for that sector, but also do you have any statistics at all on, you talked about the lack of skills and the lack of availability of workers, Aidan. Do you have a ballpark of how many workers were short in the agri-food sector or in the engineering sector, because I know, again, from personal experience in Tyrone, there's not an engineering firm that have got their full cohort of staff, and everybody's crying out for work, and that is impacting on firms' ability to take on orders and to fulfil those orders.
But just, I mean, I drive through Tyrone a lot and I see the signs up where all of welders wanted, you know, but I don't have exact figures on that. I'm not sure if Kerry's come across them. On the
No, not on that, but I would say that sort of like the Department for the Economy are, I think, working actually across a number of departments to actually look at that whole skills piece. And there's actually an event tomorrow where we'll hopefully find out more about what's known and what the future plans are to identify the skills needs for Northern Ireland in particular.
And in terms of the impact, we're actually just completing a study at the minute that is looking at the shock absorption capacity, just the capacity of businesses to deal with any shocks to the trading relationship. And we're just completing that at the minute. But is there any information you can share at the minute?
Just as in terms of sort of like overarching messages coming out of this piece of research, we are seeing sort of a majority of businesses vulnerable or in at-risk groups in relation to the shock cost associated with Brexit, and you know that's in the region both in terms of imports and exports of about 3/4 of businesses, so it's quite for Northern Ireland, so very significant for Northern Ireland firms. You mentioned also some of the issues around vulnerability and time, and while we haven't calculated that or have very specific issues around vulnerability and time, in our first piece of research in this, looking at the impact of tariffs and non-tariff barriers, we did calculate that non-tariff barrier piece for in terms of implications on cross-border trade, and it alone would account for a 9% reduction on a hard Brexit scenario of that cross-border trade, and that includes assumptions around the additional cost of time. And to give an anecdotal piece, if I may, we have spoken to a whole range of businesses who have mentioned concerns around the potential for time delays if there were any customs, for example, at the border, or indeed any delays in them actually making their journey. And we do have a number of firms in Northern Ireland who provide just-in-time services to firms in the south. So, for example, the immediate delivery of medical supplies for surgery, which really is on a just-in-time basis as the surgery gets scheduled. And any delays to that sort of process would mean that those businesses would need to reroute their supply chains in order to meet the demand of their customers. So there are some quite far-reaching implications if there are delays in delivering goods across the border.
Okay. I mean, in terms of the form filling and the costs of that, Northern Ireland manufacturing industry representative group have calculated them as very substantial. You know, in terms of the delay, it's much more than £1 per minute. It amounts into hundreds of pounds when you take in all the administrative costs that are around that as well. A business that we were working with, you know, that does upwards of, you know, close to 100 deliveries a day. If they had to start filling in forms in that at a very, very, very conservative estimate, it would add on a cost of close to 750,000 to £1 million, which in a small business can be an existential threat.
Absolutely. Just if I may, Ciarán, a supplementary to that. It's interesting on the back of Niall's question that there hasn't really, you haven't been inundated with requests from the British government that as to how Brexit will impact on all Ireland trade. Not surprising, but at the same time, you know, the fact that they haven't sought out your point of view, whether the Department of Economy has forwarded on your views or not, I don't know, but they certainly haven't sought out your views. I think that's just very telling.
Frank, you were looking to come in?
Yeah.
You want to comment on that now? No.
I'll try not to go over ground cover, but thanks for your presentation. And it's remarkable what's happened in the last 20 years when you say the increase in trade and that, and I hope it remains. Just you said a low value export. What is a low value export? Just is it agriculture or what? And secondly, to protect the cross-border supply chain in the event of Brexit, I know it's happening. What can we do to protect that cross-border supply chain? But apart from that, there's other questions, but they've already been asked. So thank you.
Maybe before you finish, could I ask in relation to the whole area of productivity, between productivity in the north is supposed to be a lot lower than the south, and maybe if you look at regions in Britain, again the north is way down there in relation to. Has that come across in your, some of your research, and would that be again one of the concerns you would have in relation to possible Brexit scenario down the road? Lastly, in relation to the voucher and that, I presume people just go on to the Intertrade website and contact yourselves in relation to that. And is this specifically for small firms, or is it open to all firms?
Yeah, sorry, just on that issue in relation to e-tendering, can other non-EU countries e-tender for your work within the European Union? I know you got an advisory from the British, the British government saying that is possible, but does it happen elsewhere?
And just the issue of the Horizon 2020 monies and funding in the context of an exit, is there going to be a problem from a northern perspective?
Okay, you can come take the export one. I'll run through the others. Productivity in Northern Ireland has been historically low and continues to lag. We have seen from our research just published that cross-border exporters have a 9% productivity premium. So it is contributing to a core problem of the Northern Ireland economy. Our cross-border trade is and does, so it would be important. And also, given the amount of businesses and that they're small businesses, we would think the impact is considerable. In terms of the vouchers, primarily it's for small firms, small businesses. Large companies, by and large, have the resources and supports from elsewhere to deal with this. In terms of Horizon 2020, there has been a guarantee that the British government will support existing partnerships up to H 2020. Beyond that, we're not sure. We don't know. There is a scope for third country status, which the British government, may avail of, but there is a degree of uncertainty there at the minute that isn't helpful, to say the least, when you're trying to form partnerships, and we do see that anecdotally as we try and promote cross-border partnerships. Let me take the other question.
Yeah, certainly. So we're talking about the low value of trips, and this piece of work was originally undertaken by NISRA, so the Statistical Research Agency in Northern Ireland, only very recently released, and it looked at the values of trips north to south, and concluded that the average value was 4,500 sterling, so which equates to sort of 5,700 roughly euros, and so they've taken in this piece of research the low value to be beneath that 4,500 sterling average, so that's the value. And you mentioned also supply chains.
What is low value? Is it milk? Is it?
Oh, sorry. In terms of the
produce, or?
Well, the majority of trade crossing the border, so roughly about 50% of it from north to south, will be in agri-products, but the actual value doesn't relate to an actual sector or product. It could be across a whole range of products. It could be box of material, some mechanical equipment. So it could be really falling into any sector. It's just the value, so it doesn't make any.
The value per delivery is much lower than it would be, say, from Northern Ireland to Britain. The value per delivery is higher, but the number of deliveries is disproportionately bigger in cross-border trade than it is in east to west trade. So, if that explains it, I'm not sure.
Sorry.
Did everything there? So I'm sorry. You asked about supply chains also.
Yeah. What can we do to protect the supply chain?
Well, but there's probably a few things that we can do, and we're looking into through our research at InterTradeIreland. So we identified the potential exposure of our supply chains through the research that we conducted earlier this year. And we're also undertaking now some further work around our supply chains to look at how we can introduce perhaps a supply chain support programme to InterTradeIreland. So that may well be a range of things. We're still undertaking the work, but looking at improving people's knowledge of supply chain management, so upskilling individual firms, but also helping them to access larger supply chains as appropriate. But that piece of work is yet to be sort of like conducted, but those are some of the things we're trying to look into at the moment.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else you want to?
The e-tender thing. I know you got a note from it from the British government, but where's the precedent for that?
The precedent for
non-EU member states being able to apply for EU contracts for tendering within the.
Yeah. It's not information that we have, so I'm sorry, it's not within my area of expertise.
You're not. There could be a precedent. I don't want to kind of like to.
Our focus is very much on the cross-border elements. So we're not experts in what the EU is doing at the minute, and. As Kerry said, there is technical issues being issued by the UK government on what will happen in the event of a no-Brexit scenario, and these are coming out every day. It's moving and changing every day.
Yeah, well, on a no-Brexit deal, I'm sure that e-tendering will be suffered down the problems that they'll have.
Yes, and I would mention too that these are guidance, technical notes from the UK government. They're not necessarily agreements that have been put in place with the EU.
But they're not in those guidance notes. They're not like referring to things like Northern Cyprus as an example, where companies in Northern Cyprus are able to e-tender for jobs in Southern Cyprus.
They do not go into that level of detail.
Oh, they certainly don't go into much detail. No, I was just trying to, because Deputy Breathnach makes a valid point about the issue of companies from the north being able to e-tender for jobs and public jobs in the south. I cannot imagine how the European Union would allow somebody who's outside the European Union and able to use unfair advantages, make up their own rules, for themselves or their workers, and then suddenly, say, and now we're going to, they're going to be at an unfair competitive advantage against other member states.
The problems would be if regulations and standards start to differ.
Well, no, but I presume that the job will be to a specific standard. The question then comes into employment law, and if they start changing, if they no longer comply with European employment law or regulations, then you would have like unfair advantage in that way, which is something they have clamped down, and we've seen that with Turkish workers being brought in for motorway schemes in here, and the EU had to clamp down on it. But I was just wondering if there any precedent that they were able to point. But
no, we can't shed any light on that. Sorry.
Thank you.
Aidan and Kerry, on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank you for appearing before the joint committee today and for answering the questions and so comprehensively. Thank you. Can we suspend now the meeting for a few minutes while we bring our next witnesses? Is that okay? Settle down? Okay. On your behalf, I'd like to formally welcome Mr. Niall Gibbons, Chief Executive Officer, Tourism Ireland. And in a moment, I'll invite you to give your opening statement, and will be followed by some questions from the committee. But first, there are the usual required notices. Notice the mobile phones. Ask people to turn them off. Niall? the other notice is really privilege. I must remind members of long-standing parliamentary practice to the fact that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person or a body outside the House or official either by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. By virtue of section 17 subsection 2L of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to the Joint Committee. If they're directed by the Chairman to cease giving evidence on a particular matter and continue to do so, they're entitled thereafter only to qualified privilege. In respect of their evidence, they are directed only that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and they are asked to respect the parliamentary practice that, where possible, they should not criticise or make charges against any person or entity by name in such a way as to make him or it identifiable. So I'd like to invite you in.
Senators, members, my name is Niall Gibbons. I'm Chief Executive of Tourism Ireland, and thanks for the opportunity to address you today. As members will know, Tourism Ireland is the organisation responsible for marketing the island of Ireland overseas. It was established as one of the 6 areas of cooperation under the framework of the Belfast Agreement of Good Friday in 1998, and we undertake marketing campaigns in 23 source markets around the globe. Tourism is a vital industry to the island of Ireland. It's a significant driver of economic growth. It supports more than 300,000 jobs in communities right across the length and breadth of this island. And overseas tourism has recorded 7 years of consecutive growth, and 2017 surpassed all previous records when we welcomed 10.6 million people to the island of Ireland, and they spent €5.6 billion while they were here. Northern Ireland has shared in that growth. In fact, it welcomed almost 2.2 million overseas visitors last year, whose visits generated a spend of more than £566 million in revenue for the economy, an increase of 4% on the previous year. And growth continues in 2018. The latest Central Statistics Office figures for Ireland show strong visitor and revenue performance in the first half of the year, and for Northern Ireland there was almost 400,000 overseas visitors in the first 3 months of the year, generating revenue of over £100 million, an increase of 3%. While tourism performance overall is strong, beneath the surface a number of vulnerabilities are evident. For example, we welcome the increase in visitor numbers from Britain in recent months, but it's too soon to know if this represents a real long-term turnaround in trend. Exchange rate movements have made Ireland more expensive for British visitors, and as we've observed, our competitors Visit Britain, Visit Scotland and Visit Wales have intensified their operations across all of our main tourism markets. Chairman, Brexit dominates all other uncertainties, and since the UK voted to leave the European Union, Tourism Ireland has taken a number of steps to monitor the situation, maintain confidence among our partners in Britain and at home, and ensure that we're ready to deal with the implications. Our activities have included ongoing research amongst British consumers to evaluate sentiment on holidaying in Ireland, ongoing market assessment of economic trends by Oxford Economics, liaison with key tourism partners here on the island of Ireland to assess implications and gauge reaction, and liaison with key international partners and bodies such as the European Tour Operators Association, UK Inbound and the Tourism Alliance in the United Kingdom for the same reasons. This work continues, and I'd like to thank Brendan Griffin, Minister of State for Tourism and Sport, and his officials for their participation in our Brexit Task Force meetings in London over the last 2 years. Tourism Ireland has also commissioned a wide-ranging review of the British market. The review is independently chaired and is led by a steering group of top Irish and UK-based industry partners. It will conclude shortly and will inform planning for 2019 and beyond. In parallel with this, Tourism Ireland continues to pursue its strategy of market diversification. This strategy, which commenced in 2014, focuses more effort on markets with longer stay and higher spend. This has seen mainland Europe become the largest contributor of overseas tourism revenue, delivering almost €1.9 billion of spend in 2017, up from €1.4 billion in 2014. That's an increase of 36%. And North America has overtaken Britain as number 2, delivering €1.6 billion in spend, up from €1 billion in 2014, an increase of 60%. Last spring, our national TV and digital campaigns in the United States were seen by about 85 million people, and TV and digital campaigns in Germany and France reached a combined 39 million potential visitors. Opportunities in the fast-growing emerging markets of the East continue to grow, especially in China, following the launch this year of the first-ever direct air services from Beijing and Hong Kong, with Hainan Airlines and Cathay Pacific, respectively. We've also identified a number of key priorities from an overseas tourism perspective arising out of Brexit. Retention of the common travel area, free movement of overseas visitors across the border is vitally important, especially for overseas tourism to Northern Ireland and to border counties. On average, 75% of visitors from North America to Northern Ireland and 63% of visitors from Europe arrive via the Republic of Ireland. In addition, about 950 international tour operators now programme the island of Ireland. Any impediment or perceived impediment to free movement between the two jurisdictions and any delays at border checkpoints could discourage tour operators from continuing to programme Northern Ireland and border counties and holiday visitors from travelling between the two jurisdictions. With regard to developing markets such as China, India and the Middle East, the British-Irish visa scheme announced by the UK and Irish governments in October 2014 and the short-stay visa waiver programme introduced by the Irish government in 2011 and extended until October 2021 have provided a significant boost to our promotional efforts in these markets. The lifting of the visa requirement for citizens of the UAE travelling to Ireland in January 2018 was welcomed by the industry, which has seen an increase in business from that market since relaxation. We are very pleased in Tourism Ireland that the World Economic Forum's Global Travel and Tourism Competitiveness Index ranks Ireland at number 3 in the globe out of 136 countries for effectiveness of marketing and branding to attract tourists. Ireland.com now attracts close to 20 million unique visitors a year and is available in 11 different languages. Tourism Ireland is the 4th most popular tourism board in the world on Facebook with 4.3 million fans, the 4th on Twitter and the 3rd on YouTube. The creation of award-winning digital campaigns have capitalised on our connections with Game of Thrones and Star Wars and allowed us to reach new audiences across the world. Campaigns with the major air and sea carriers serving the island of Ireland and with traditional online and tour operators leverage significant funding each year from the commercial sector, encouraged also by investment by Irish Ferries and Stena Line over the last number of years. Our annual overseas publicity programme and our relationship with 22,000 international media from around the globe generate positive exposure for the island of Ireland worth an estimated €330 million each year and greatly influence perceptions of Ireland overseas. Favourable wins, like a 39% increase in air access since 2010, particularly on transatlantic routes, supportive economic conditions in key markets, the fashionability of the island of Ireland as a location for things like Star Wars and Game of Thrones, and our capacity to shift to new, lower-cost digital and social marketing have helped to deliver record performances to the island of Ireland. Few, if any, of those factors will continue in our favour indefinitely. We've seen how economic uncertainty and fluctuating exchange rates have impacted on visitor numbers from Great Britain. Research is also showing a significant and worrying diminution in what we call Ireland's share of voice or visibility in our top markets. Over the past 2 years, we've seen major competitors intensify their marketing. Also, a critical component is the future of the EU-UK Open Skies Agreement, which has the potential to have significant downside risks for Ireland if a successful resolution is not found. In addition to this, the price of oil poses a risk to the sustainability of air routes. Tourism Ireland is working with industry partners to grow overseas tourism revenue by 5% in 2018, and we look well on target to exceed that. Moving into 2019, we expect to place a more significant emphasis on season extension, regional performance and sustainability. Tourism has engaged many crises over the last 20 years. 9/11, the global financial crisis and terrorist attacks, North America and mainland Europe. However, it also serves as an example of how compromise and goodwill between people can build a stronger future for all of us. We face a deficit of tolerance. Tourism brings people together. It opens our minds and our hearts, said the United Nations World Tourism Organization's Secretary-General Talib Rifai at a recent conference. And we must continue to build on the achievements of the Good Friday Agreement, continue to build hope for the future across the island of Ireland, and growing a sustainable tourism industry is key to this. Thanks for the opportunity to present to you today, and I'm happy to discuss any of these matters and answer any questions that may arise.
Thanks very much, Niall. First question is Niall.
Thank you very much.
Frank.
It's good news all around and indeed for the island of Ireland. A few questions I want to ask. Congratulations, and probably it wasn't yourself, but on the air links between Beijing and Hong Kong and Hainan. I think this is hugely significant for the island of Ireland, and we need to do a lot more. And you know, I have to think that Ryanair and Aer Lingus especially, we should be very, very proud of them because they're providing value flights, especially from Europe, to come into the country. But one thing, and I suppose in opposition we complained about it and it cost an awful lot, was Terminal 2. It's absolutely that you have the increase on passengers coming from the United States, and I've noticed now that, you know, over in the UK, where they might have stopped in Manchester and other airports, Dublin now is an airport we should be very, very proud of. Just finally, I'm coming from the west of Ireland. Knock Airport is certainly delivering as well, and it's bringing in passengers, especially from the UK, into the west of Ireland, and I've seen that that's filtering around. Just two questions I want to ask. Airbnb, how influential is it, not just in Dublin but around the country? Because I've noticed even when we went on vacation, we used Airbnb around the country. And just finally, one thing that tourism is an all-Ireland basis. Tourism is on All-Ireland, but there's two T's that have certainly brought the people of the island together, and that's the Titanic in Belfast. It's brought people from the Republic especially up to see Belfast first time, and actually Tato Park. It's brought more people from the north, the real Tato Park. But what those two projects have done is that they've actually brought people from different parts of the island who normally would never, people from the north who would never have been in the Republic, to come to Tato Park, and many other, but especially Titanic, and we should be very, very proud of them. Thank you.
On the air access picture, I mean, it's a very positive picture overall. I mean, this summer there were 591,000 seats every single week available from all destinations, and to put that in perspective, in the summer of 2010 it was about 424,000. So we actually now have about 170,000 more seats every single week. We're very pleased with the progress that Aer Lingus have made, particularly on transatlantic, in terms of opening new routes and expanding existing ones. And I was just with Ryanair this morning announcing their summer schedule for 2019, which will see further expansion next year. So that's a particularly good story. In relation to China and Hong Kong, the route from Cathay Pacific is performing very well. I met their representative here yesterday, and I attended the Irish Hong Kong Business Forum, and there certainly is a large increase in the amount of trade and tourism now flowing. The advantage with Hong Kong, it's English speaking, there's no visa requirement, and those are two real added advantages. We face much bigger challenges in China because we really are painting on a blank canvas. I mean, the Ireland brand wouldn't be well known, so we have an awareness issue. We also have a visa regime, which we're working with the Department of Justice to try and improve that vis-à-vis our competitors. So, for example, if someone from China who chooses to go to Europe will get a Schengen visa, which will give them travel around 25 different countries at the same price that it will cost to come to Ireland alone for a visa. So those are challenges I think we really want to try and improve. But we're delighted to have that air access from Beijing as well. I think Terminal 2, we've got a very good working relationship with all the airports. Certainly Terminal 2 now has really proved its worth, particularly for visitors from the North Atlantic. And we maintain a very close working relationship with Knock, which is a vital gateway for the west of Ireland. They accept that. Airbnb has grown in significance over the last number of years. It would have been a very small percentage of overall business. We've subscribed recently to a site called AirDNA, and certainly there's a significant number of properties available on Airbnb, particularly in rural Ireland as well. In places like Cork and Galway, the data would suggest that there are more beds available on Airbnb than there are in hotels. But that has acted as a safety valve in our industry because given the increase in air traffic and the number of people travelling, we can see the impact on demand on hotel prices in Dublin, where there was nothing built for 6 or 7 years. In relation to the attractions, there's no doubt about it that all those new attractions that have come on stream have really added to the tourism experience. I'd like to congratulate the people in Titanic Belfast. It wasn't there 8 years ago, and it welcomed 850,000 visitors last year. And I think the work that they've done working with Tourism Ireland abroad has been absolutely terrific. And Tato Park, went down to visit the family last year. They're very good too.
Thanks, Niall, for the presentation as well. I have a couple of points. I actually remember having to go on the media quite a fair bit in the run-up to the opening of Titanic Belfast to defend visitor numbers, because everyone told us we wouldn't hit the visitor numbers, and we did. We got the million earlier than expected. Anyway, but so it has been a success in terms of tourism. In relation to the Airbnb, now, just firstly, are you able to measure that, and do you measure the Airbnb stays in the same way as you would like hotel and B&B stays? The other issue, one of the big glaring omissions for me in terms of actually strengthening our tourism brand internationally in particular, is the kind of it's a bugbear of mine, so I don't know if you have an opinion on it, whether personal or corporately, is when the Wild Atlantic Way stops at Derry and Ireland's Ancient East stops in Louth and doesn't go into, down Patrick and South Armagh, around the whole Cuchulainn aspect and all of that kind of stuff as well. So I think it makes real practical sense to join those two up, to bring the Wild Atlantic Way over to include the North Antrim coast and the Giant's Causeway and all of that. It's really just then to get your feedback now on the Airlinks, particularly in Belfast International and the loss of the New York flight and the impact that has, and if there's any work there in particular in targeting North America, because I believe there has been some additional flights from into North America, but obviously not via Belfast International, via Dublin. So it's really just that ongoing work of getting them to turn the other way on the motorway when they come out of Terminal 2. And then lastly, Chair, just to really commend what Tourism Ireland are doing overseas now. I've been a long-time supporter and champion of what you are doing. I think Ireland works best when it works together, and you are an exemplar in terms of that and in terms of what you do, because we are stronger, whether that's in terms of our branding, in terms of our delivery, when we are as one. And certainly I know you have had a particular investment yourself into tourism, and certainly in places like Belfast that maybe wouldn't be the mainstream, wouldn't be the kind of big iconic attractions, and that has had real tangible benefits on the ground. Next year we're hoping to open the new James Connolly Interpretive Centre on the Falls Road, which will be a great new tourism asset along a whole series of tourism things that are beyond the big iconic places that get actually people into the real authentic tourism and experience, and I'm sure that's the case right across the entirety of the island. So the Airbnb stuff, the Wild Atlantic Way and Ancient East, and the Belfast International.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. We have had a number of discussions with Airbnb. Not as easy to quantify the scale and scope of it as it would be for, say, hotels that are registered, when we know they've got a bed on sale for 365 days of the year, because some people could put their property on Airbnb for 2 weeks and take it off. We know that the average host earns about €3,500 a year. But we certainly know that the size and scope of Airbnb has grown rapidly over the last number of years, no question about that. But we are working with Airbnb and with our colleagues in the Department of Tourism, Transport and Sport to get a better handle on actually quantifying it. But certainly it's played a much bigger role than it has done in the last 3 years, significant growth. In relation to Wild Atlantic Way, Ireland's Ancient East, I've been very vocal in this respect. I mean, our overseas customer, doesn't recognise borders. I mean, they're looking for an experience. That's the bottom line. We feel that there are really good opportunities for the Wild Atlantic Way, particularly linking into Derry. And I know there's been a lot of positive discussions in that space. And we've talked before about Derry being the sort of the intersection point between the Causeway Coast and the Wild Atlantic Way. I think that sort of peace story in the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement would go down very well, actually, and we'll get a lot of positive attention. And I think with Ireland's Ancient East as well, I mean, you stretch into the likes of the ecclesiastical capital and Downpatrick, there's real good resonances there. But I know our colleagues in Fáilte Ireland are absolutely open, and they've talked to their colleagues in Tourism Northern Ireland, and we remain open to promote them as sort of combined experiences. And the new Ireland's Hidden Heartlands, which has been developed by Fáilte Ireland, which is along the Shannon corridor, so to speak. I think it would be really important that Fermanagh and the Lakelands are included as part of that as well when its time comes to go into the international marketplace, which will be into later in 2019. Thanks for your kind words. I mean, I've been very personally committed to some of the developments in Northern Ireland. I think the work that's been done on Feighan 30 was outstanding. I think I went up and met them first 10 years ago, and it's amazing to see the progress, the quality of the walking tours. The international journalists that come in have really positive comments in that space, and we had some industry over from France recently who did the walking tour in West Belfast, and again it just opens up a whole new dimension of experience tourism for them, so that was very, very encouraging, so thank you for that. And we'll continue to do it. We've had a dialogue going with the Grand Orange Lodge of Ireland for 10 years. It's a long journey to go, but the new interpretive centre has helped in that respect, and I think all these things being a flavour in relation to things to do and see when you're on the island of Ireland, that adds to the diversity of it.
And just on the Airlinks, Niall, in the Belfast,
sorry, excuse me, yes.
New York
yeah, I mean, the situation with regard to air access in North America, it's been a very strong journey for the island of Ireland. So, for example, 10 years ago, there were about 35,000 seats a week from the United States and Canada. It's now about 65,000. Those have concentrated more into Dublin, although when we saw Norwegian Air open last year, they did open into Dublin, Belfast, Shannon and Cork. Unfortunately, we have lost the Belfast link now, which is really unfortunate. There used to be 3 air carriers that went from Canada into Belfast. We don't have any now. It's all concentrated into Dublin and a small bit into Shannon. And Cork has lost the winter service for Norwegian as well. It's gone on sale for next summer. Norwegian has expanded slightly into Shannon Airport. We remain concerned in relation to the direct air access because that is the lead indicator for tourism performance, and I will continue to work as best we can to encourage more direct air access into Belfast, but it's proving very, very difficult. And I think the view as well would be from the American carriers is that a lot of people want to have a part of their holiday in Dublin, although Northern Ireland is growing. And the other issue is the custom and border clearance in Dublin and Shannon makes a huge difference to the ease of travel, and that facility isn't available in Belfast at the moment.
And Declan then out.
Right, thanks, Chair, and Niall, very much. I've tried recently to book the studio tour for Harry Potter in London, and there's a handful of slots available between now and 2019. A handful. So I very much welcome the Game of Thrones project, I think, around Banbridge, and I think anything that we can use to get people in here is hugely important. So the Game of Thrones and that the film industry in the north has been great for us anyway, and Star Wars then both in Donnghaile and in Kerry, I know they've had a bit of an uplift. I suppose you talked about the areas that you've been very strong on and how you don't expect them to last forever, and you're looking at new USPs, if you like, to attract people to the island of Ireland. I'd agree certainly that Ireland's hidden heartland should include Fermanagh, but I also think there's scope, and I know Arts Over Borders have done great work in the border region, and they're talking about a literary corridor now from Yates through Heaney and down to Kavanagh, that we could have a new unique selling point in terms of literary tourism. I also wonder to what extent do you feel that are we exploiting political tourism enough, north and south? Because I know when we went to we took the children to Glasnevin in 2015, it was booked out that morning. We got the last slot of the day. So I think there is a desire and an appetite there to learn about our political past as well, and that's something that people do come. I know if you ever try to get into our office in the Falls Road on a summer's morning, you're running a gauntlet of hundreds of tourists on the Falls, and I think we should be exploiting every opportunity we can to get people into the country and to see what we've got to offer. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with you on the Game of Thrones issue. I mean, it's come out of nowhere. I mean, we were very fortunate to establish a relationship with HBO very early, who signed a licence agreement with Tourism Ireland to allow us to use the term Northern Ireland Game of Thrones territory. Now, Game of Thrones is filmed in Croatia, Spain, Iceland, so it's the first mover advantage thing. You know, we got in early, and I mean, again, you know, the example of working across government with the Irish Film Board in the instance of Star Wars allowed us to get a very early relationship with Lucasfilm, with Disney, that got us way ahead of the curve. I think there's great legacy possibilities for Game of Thrones. I mean, next year is the last series. We're in talks with them. You might have seen our Door of Thrones campaign. If you haven't, go to Blake's to the Hollow. The door is actually hanging there. And the tapestry in the Ulster Museum was the second most visited exhibit they ever had. And it brought a younger profile of visitor in as well. I mean, this is bringing, you know, the north of Ireland to a new generation of people that would never thought about it. And I think there's exciting prospects down the road, I think, in relation to Game of Thrones, and there should be a good legacy in relation to that. I agree with you in relation to the Arts Over Borders. I mean, I think literature is something that we really have good standout cachet abroad for. It plays well into the publicity space. International journalists, you know, that we have about 1,500 journalists that come into the island of Ireland every year on carefully selected itineraries, and that's one space that plays into very well. So if something does develop, I was up in the Heaney Centre before. I think it's outstanding, you know, what they've done. But I think I like the idea of doing something cross-border. I think that would work very well. I mean, I agree with you on political tourism. I think we are still It's part of the programme for international publicity. I've done the Coast the Tour many times on the Falls Road. It's still very, very one of the highlights for me personally. But I think our visitors are very interested in that history as well, and particularly history that's well told. I think the key thing is having a good guide. People have to be well trained. And I think the centenary in 2016 as well has played as a good platform in terms of promoting, this space abroad, and having good facilities like, as you mentioned, Glasnevin Cemetery is excellent, and the tour they offer, and they have quite a sort of quirky way of telling the whole story of Irish history. So that's very much part of our mantra abroad as well. So it's.
Okay, thank you.
I think Tourism Ireland has been a great story and continues to be a growing story. Of publicising our country and obviously that hidden gem of tourism. But just a couple of questions. Obviously, our capacity to cater for that growing number, is it there? Is it continuing to grow? It often strikes me that we are obviously clear that obviously the UK market is our bigger market, and you've referenced issues that could cause problems in the context of Brexit. But I often wonder to what degree we have a further capacity there. I mean, if it's like a shuttle bus from Liverpool I describe it from Liverpool to either Dublin or Belfast, and the opportunities to market into very small or very large populations to fill spaces out of season. Is that something you look at? Because I firmly believe, from my travels, being into Manchester or Liverpool, you don't see very much encouragement for people to come to Ireland, and it is like a shuttle bus service, certainly between the international airport in Belfast and those large cities, even for weekend visitors. So this is a constructive criticism I'm making. The other thing, we all understand the flagships, and I was accused many times of dealing in the micro instead of dealing in the macro. But as far as I'm concerned, rural Ireland has an important role to play outside of the flagships that are to be commended. And I hope you take this in the way I'm saying it as constructive criticism. In my view, both our history, our archaeology, our geology, our architecture, you name it, is all recorded in our libraries, in books. And I'd ask you to comment on when are we going to get a programme where, whether you're a local tourist in Ireland, which is an important trade itself in moving around, or indeed that you come in, that outside of visiting the flagships, that people will be trailed, and I accept Ireland's ancient East and the programme that you referred to, certainly in the Midlands, but the ability for us to be able to communicate in an IT system to people as they traverse our side roads about whether it's the place name, the townland, the importance, say, of a Harry Clark window in a church. The people are driving through, people are walking, people are cycling. Surely we can give them that hidden history that will actually make them stay longer in rural Ireland. And I'd ask you to comment as to what is being done with that. And finally, in relation to the issue of further cross-border trade, I do think there have been some fantastic walkways and greenways being created. The Narrow Bridge as a tourism project to link probably the most beautiful area of Ireland. I often call it the Kerry of the north, into both the Coolies and the Mournes. Do you see that project as being one that can be promoted into the future? And I suppose my very last question relates to the most recent change in the 9% back up to the 13%. Have you an opinion on that in terms of whether it will impact on the hospitality and tourism sector? That change, particularly back to where I suppose my native roots go, is to be to see rural Ireland improve and not to disimprove. And I think we have a great opportunity, as I said, from what's in our libraries to transfer it and translate it through applications. That if you travel to a small village in County Louth or a small village in County Meath, that you, whether you're the child sitting in the back of the car who may have an interest in the story of McLoughlin that Niall referred to, or the story of Sestanta, or the adult driving the car who has the interest maybe in architecture, that we can clearly identify what is and get the information that is there but needs to be captured for the visitor. Thank you.
Okay, a number of points there. The first one you had mentioned, can we still keep growing at this particular pace? I think we have to be very mindful. We've seen rapid growth over the last 7 or 8 years, but we are facing into sustainability issues in certain parts of the country, and I think we have to be very careful that we get into much more balanced growth. Our emphasis is shifting now into more emphasis on regional spread, particularly out of season as well. And in relation to our campaigns, we'll launch a new campaign in 2019, and that will have a much more sustainable focus to it, so to speak, in driving those things. The first part of the campaign actually goes into a shoot next Monday, and is focusing on the northern half of the island of Ireland, so to speak, because that's where the biggest opportunities lie at the moment in relation to growth. In relation to the Great Britain market, one of the reasons why you won't have seen as much as you might have expected or liked in places like Liverpool and Manchester is that our budget sharply reduced in Great Britain from what it used to be in 2012, and visibility isn't what it used to be, but we're delighted to see that the Minister has granted additional funds to Tourism Ireland in budget 2019, so you will see more of that. So we have to be very careful how we focus where our investment goes in Britain. But we will tend to put, for example, Wonders of the Wild Atlantic Way campaign this year was put into places like Liverpool, Bristol, Manchester, Birmingham and Edinburgh, into the West of Ireland airports. It's all about Derry, Knock, Shannon, Kerry and Cork. And again, it's promoting the region-to-region capacity. So we'll keep on doing that because it's very, very important. Our emphasis is on promoting Ireland overseas, so I probably can't give you a direct answer. I think it's a very good idea. I don't see why on apps on a mobile phone you can't have all your local history in one place where you can touch it. So I'm not quite sure where that might stand at the moment, but I can find out and talk to some colleagues back in the office in relation to that. I've been up to meet the colleagues at Narrowwater Bridge, and again, as new assets come on stream, it opens up new possibilities in relation to tourism, and we're more than happy to promote that. Particularly where new things are coming on stream. Our international publicity programme is very effective. We have 22,000 international media on our database, and we send them out regular communications in relation to new news, so to speak, and we invite them in on tailored programmes where there are new news stories as well. And if that happens, we'll be very happy to include that. In relation to VAT, it went back up from 9% to 13.5%. The industry have already expressed disappointment in that respect because it will take €460 million out of the industry. I think certainly the rural community are much more concerned in relation to it, as are the restaurant sector. Look, my job is promoting Ireland abroad. We've got good air access coming on stream this winter and next year, so there are possibilities for growth, and we've got an increase in our budget and we'll give it our best. And I think it's really important that we all work together. I think we found that the one thing we learned out of the recession, projects like the Wild Atlantic Way, Ireland's Ancient East, is not just about the marketing of those regions, it's actually getting communities to actually work together to create a great experience for people when they come, and they've got a fantastic reaction abroad, and we'll keep doing that in 2019 and beyond.
Thank you.
Mark and Maureen and Niall, you won't mind taking the two of them together?
Yeah, sure.
And Francis.
Yeah, just on Declan asked the issue and you answered it on the VAT rate. On the Chinese visitors numbers and the common visa with the UK, what percentage of those who get the UK visa, which would make them eligible for Ireland, come to Ireland, and what are the impediments to them coming? You refer to English tourists, and obviously Brexit will have a big impact on that, but from where we were, like once sterling started devaluing, how big is the difference, and what is the plan to get them back, given that it's likely that the sterling differential will be the same for quite some time. On the issue of Ireland reaching out was an initiative where local communities who were often not on the main tourist routes but were very much part of this concept of destination tourism. So places that would never see a tourist but would, through community groups, and 2,000 of them in each parish, were able to identify ancestors and say, why don't you come back? back, and then, you know, whatever annual festival would be on, that they would come back to see where they were, even if it was 5 or 6 generations. And that concept, given the huge scale of the diaspora and the now DNA and all the rest, is there any specific focus on improving that as a way of bringing tourists to locations that would never really see tourists, and especially kind of the more rural areas? And the other one was on, it was an idea that I'd seen with Australian tourism, and I'm sure you've looked at it, was as a very cheap way of getting advertising in America, they invited the whole Oprah Winfrey show over to Australia, and to do it at the Sydney Opera House. Now, I wouldn't say that you want to do it in Ireland on St. Patrick's Day, but the ancestor of Con Colbert, his name is Colbert. And he often refers to the fact he's actually related to Con Colbert, who was executed in 1916. Is any? I know you've done different initiatives like that, and like things like you have Fassbender, be another fella. I mean, he's from Kerry, But the idea of the Red Bull series that they had with around the Rock of Cashel, which I know you were involved in, and then the series where they had off the Aran Islands and the diving, and which features all over the world. But something on that scale where I know it's a big budget issue if you're bringing the whole of the Colbert show over to Ireland for St. Patrick's Week, but you get that free publicity that is a multiplier effect. And have you looked at that as a way of doing it? And on a more local issue, there's a new public park in Kenmare. We'd like you to come down. Mickey Ned O'Sullivan, the captain of the 75 team, is the chairman of the initiative to get funding from yourselves so that we could bring more tourists to Kenmare. So you're more than welcome to come down and look at it. I know it's not because you want to get rid of me or anything.
That was 4 times Kenmare got in there.
China, I hear, is a good spot.
Some of the Senator's colleagues would have us think that nobody is going to carry it all and that they're on their knees.
We can always take a few more.
It was a very impressive report and backed up with lots of statistics. Going from the VAT again, and the price of hotels in Dublin, it's quite embarrassing. When you hear what they're charging, and I would just have fears over the increase now where that's going to be seen. And you are talking about promoting Ireland, but if we're pricing ourselves out of that, I do think it could be significant. And the other point I would make is that I just would know from friends in the small restaurant business the staff shortages that they're facing. And I know it's not your role, but I think it all leads into the whole thing about promoting Ireland. We know people, okay, they come into Dublin, the capital city, etc. Do you have any particular figures on the numbers who move out of Dublin? Because they do go to rural Ireland, in spite of what certain people say. And there are parts of rural Ireland that are doing very well, rightly so, because they're places of great, great beauty. I have a particular interest in the islands of Ireland. And I think, really, apart from the Aran Islands, which have, you know, some of the literary, etc., aspects that draw people there are other islands, and I think they have a particular beauty of their own, and some of them are really on their knees in terms of viability and sustainability. And when the Wild Atlantic Way was being promoted, now I know it was about road connections, but it just didn't make sense to me that our islands that are in the Atlantic Ocean were not being included in that. So I really would, you know, ask you to have a look at some promotion on the islands in particular, specific to the islands. Okay.
Land Bay or Islands?
No, I didn't. No, okay. I didn't. No.
Oh, it's actually on the
okay. Okay, it's Cape Clear Island. I know the best. Okay. If you really want to.
For the island. Yeah. Breathnach.
Okay, I'll try and answer all those. On the Chinese issue, we've done some research which indicates at the moment that the vast majority of people coming from China are coming for both the UK and Ireland package experience. So that the UK-Ireland visa scheme is absolutely, you know, vital in that respect, and you know, hopefully post-Brexit that will confirmed to stay in existence, so to speak. It's going to be really important. We simply won't get the cut through on our own in China. There hasn't been a history of, you know, enough, like you'd have in America, so to speak, of awareness of Ireland, etc. So a lot of people are coming on packages, you know, typically 7-9 days, start in London, finish in Dublin. But there are, I mean, nearly 70,000 people travelling between Scotland and Northern Ireland on Stena Line. You know, so there is a whole UK-Ireland experience, which is really important. In relation to British visitor numbers, we saw a reduction of about 7% 7% last year, largely related to the change in sterling. Ireland became, or the Eurozone became 20% more expensive. This year we've seen the last 5 months an increase of 2%, so we've clawed back, or 2.5%, we've clawed back some of the losses. The air access situation has stabilised in the UK, that's good. We'll have more ferry access next year. Irish Ferries have got the WB8s going on the Holyhead Dublin route. Stena have got an investment in craft as well that will come on stream in 2020. And I pointed as well that the largest investment in the history of Irish tourism is taking place at the moment in Longford and Centre Parks, and that has the capacity to help grow numbers from Great Britain as well. That's €230 million. Hasn't been talked about a lot, but I think that's a significant one that will be important and useful in attracting British tourists. We're well aware of Ireland reaching out. I think it was a very unique initiative at the time, got great coverage in publications like the New York Times, particularly when Ireland was coming out of recession and was able to look into its soul and reconnect with our diaspora, which the gathering probably is one of the examples of the most significant tourism project that we've ever had, that on a very low budget managed to tap into the story of the Irish. And we still do a lot of work with diaspora media abroad, for example. We connect with diaspora groups every time we go abroad. The GAA have an important role to play in keeping us connected. And with technology as well, the world has become a much smaller place now because we're all a click away from all our relations abroad. But it's something Tourism Ireland pays an awful lot of attention to. In relation to the big initiatives, we know Oprah went to Australia. We're always watching each other for robbing each other's big ideas. Our own one on St Patrick's Day, by the way, is global greening, which started off in lighting up the Sydney Opera House on what was the 200th anniversary of the first reception for Irish expats in 1810 by Governor McLoughlin Macquarie, and we asked.
Were they convicts or just like visitors?
I don't know their CVs, but they lit up the Opera House green in 2010, and since then we've gone on to last year light up 300 global icons green around the world on St Patrick's Day, and the PR value that gives Ireland is just incredible. Really, there's no other country in the world that does it. But there's icons that you never thought would go green, like Nelson's Pillar in Trafalgar Square and things like that. It just shows you the affection for which the Irish are renowned abroad. But film tourism is another example of great innovation. I mean, between Star Wars and Game of Thrones, those campaigns have been seen by 250 million people around the globe. So we do reach big numbers, and we're always open to new ideas, by the way. It's just to say that if anyone has any. To go back to the point on hotel prices, I agree. I think it's particularly in our urban areas, and it's not only Dublin, there are other places as well where people have to be so careful in relation to the prices that are being charged. I understand that it's a supply and demand issue. Very few hotels got built, demand increased a lot. But for Dublin, for example, Dublin isn't competing with London or Paris or Rome. It's competing with secondary cities like Barcelona, Amsterdam and Copenhagen. And if we get more expensive like we did 10 years ago, we will see a fall in business. It's inevitable. So we have to be really, really mindful. The VAT issue, we're obviously more concerned about rural areas particularly, and in the restaurant scene as well, where margins are low. There is a capacity there to suffer. So that's why regionality and seasonality is going to be a big part of our campaigns for next year. In relation to the islands of Ireland, I agree actually, and a lot of work has been done. I think of Skellig. I think there's a balancing act to be done here, because Skellig is about 14 or 15,000 visitors. It probably can't take any more. No. We have done work promoting Ireland's islands before. There's a new ferry down in Doolin now as well, which is just carrying more.
Aran Islands, I'm talking about all the other ones.
Yeah, fair enough. Pardon?
No, sorry, I just agree with Maureen.
Right. So there has been specific work done, I know, with Breathnach as well, and on Valentia, the transatlantic cable station. There's talk of that perhaps been twinned with the opposite number in Newfoundland. But certainly, if there's any issues you want to bring to my attention, I'd be happy to go back to the team and talk to them about it. Yeah, very happy to do that.
So, question is, Francis.
It's lovely to see you here, Niall. I know I've met you a couple of times, and I just really want to, I suppose, commend the work that you're doing. I think I can see that you love the work that you're doing, and you're very passionate about it, and you're doing a great job. And it must be lovely to be going abroad and selling such a beautiful product, to be honest with you, because it probably the island of Ireland is one of the most beautiful countries in the world, and your job is to go out there and sell it. I agree with a couple of my colleagues' comments, like Maureen talking about hotel prices, and of course islands, which, they're all slagging me here. I brought them all up to Rathlin Island, and we had a great time. But I also, think it's a great idea, to bring the Wild Atlantic Way up north, across to Derry, and across to, Cushendall, Cushendun, all around there. It's so beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful parts of this country. Now, I know my father's from there, but, he's from Rathlin, and it's so stunning. And I often often, you know, it often saddens me when I'm going up to Rathlin, and I go up there 3 or 4 times a year, where I don't see signs for Rathlin Island, you know, and I start to see them in Ballycastle now. But I mean, it's so beautiful, and even day trips over there and just walking the islands, I mean, it really is heaven. And I know I'm pitching here a little bit, but you know, that is the reality, and it's the only island in the 6 counties, you know, so it should be kind of getting that little bit more, and it's only now that it's starting to come to the fore how beautiful Rathlin is. But no, I really just want to commend you really on the great job that you're doing, and the fact that I wasn't aware, and I feel bad saying this, that Tourism Ireland is an all-island, you know, initiative, and I think that's fantastic, and we should be, you know, taking that model and using it for, you know, other things that's going on, you know, because it's obviously working, and it's fantastic. So I just want to say thank you, and thank you for your great presentation.
Jerry, last word.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Chair. I'm sorry I didn't get your presentation. Unfortunately, I was called away for a meeting. But I too want to join with my colleagues in congratulating you on the work you do. You really do fantastic work, and it's only when you sort of take a drive around the country and see the various attractions that are there. So it's fantastic. But to get back to the issue of hotels and the cost of hotels, I remember in 2012 being caught on the western side of Ireland with no hotel booked, and I picked up the phone and I started one of the premier hotels, and the receptionist said to me, "Yeah, we have a room." I said, "How much?" €35. I said, "Sorry?" She said, €35. I said, "I'll book it straight away." I was recently over in the same part of the world, caught in exactly the same way, and I tried a number of different hotels, and I finished up with one of the lesser hotels, shall we say, €235 for the night. Now, I mean, it is impossible to see how that sort of money is justifiable, and to my mind it is wrong in every sense of the word. It's destroying a lot of the good work that your organisation is doing, and wages have not gone up commensurate with the cost of a room for the night. I accept insurance costs and lots of other costs have gone up, but at the end of the day, the core wage has not gone up. So I find that is in some way damaging you. The other thing, we do a lot of looking outside the country for tourism. The number of people that I meet in particularly the south of Ireland who have never visited places like Rathlin, which the drive to Cushendall I will never forget. It was absolutely beautiful. We need to look a little bit more at staycations, at staying in this country, beautiful country that it is, at visiting places like Rathlin, at visiting places like County Down. So anything that can be done to improve that. And the final point I'll make to you is in relation to tidy towns. They've done a fantastic job in making Ireland a really beautiful place. But God damn it to hell, there are some parts of Ireland that when you drive into them, all you see is boarded up retail outlets. You know, the total lack of life, or any semblance of life. All you can see is the death of a town or a village. And if we could find some way of incentivising people in order to at least keep the facade looking lively, looking respectable, looking like something that we would want to visit. But apart from that, I think you do a fantastic job, and I'm sorry I missed your presentation earlier.
Yeah. But thanks very much. Yeah, I mean, I take your point in relation to hotels. You can't make money on €35 a night, but when you start to price yourself out of the market, it takes years to get your reputation back when you do lose it. And we keep on hammering that message home. Yeah, I agree with Tidy Town. I think Tidy Towns has been a fantastic initiative. I think anything that gets communities involved in tourism, they take really great ownership and pride. And it's very obvious you can pick a lot of towns out. I sometimes quote Westport as an example, you know, of one where it's always up there in the top ranks from a tourism perspective, where Tidy Towns plays a huge role in the community spirit. And thanks for your kind words. We have 150 staff based in 23 locations around the world, and they don't often get home. They'll all get home for the first time together at the end of this year. But they do appreciate people, a pat on the back and that type of thing. So I'll pass on those kind words. They do a terrific job, and we're very proud of them.
Thanks very much. Is there anyone else? Again, Niall, really appreciate you coming in, giving your time, and you know, the amount of time you put aside for questions and so on. And we look forward to meeting you again. Okay,
thank you.
So I'm suspending the meeting and we go into private session now.